So I've got to get this transmission lined up in the right spot, and to get it far enough back, I had to cut off the starter mount and the primary support mount. Harley people might cringe at this. That gets me far enough back. The next thing I have to do is, I took off the driven sprocket for the rear wheel, and I found this offset sprocket for when Harley guys want a wider back tire. They convert to a chain and then move this out. And that put me exactly, I was gonna manufacture this, but once I saw it online, I bought it. And this has to line up with the rear chain exactly. And what I've got here is I've got the bike strapped down into its sag position. Once all the parts are back on here and I'm riding it, I need the chain to not rub on the swing arm, or it can hit this, but I don't want it wearing that away. So this needs to be in a specific spot, lined up and the right height and level. Now here's the problem with the clutch assembly. It's gigantic. I pressed this apart to make sure I could make it work, but well, that's on backwards. So once I figure out the position of the transmission, then I can bring the motor back into its position and start figuring out how I'm gonna make this also a stressed member of the frame, which is gonna involve a bunch of triangulation and building a truss out of all my mounts, so that the engine is static. Another issue I have is because the Harley transmissions, the way this one was engineered, is it has a chain and there's a tensioner that keeps the tension between the engine and the transmission. I don't want to have that, which presents a problem because now I'm going to have to be able to adjust the transmission to get the tension between the engine and the transmission on the primary chain. So this engine is going to be static. The transmission needs to move at least 5/8 of an inch. I'll probably make it an inch adjustment. And then figuring out how to make all these points in the frame so that it's strong enough that if I go off road, I don't fold the frame in half. Another problem with mounting it is these engines are made, there's all these mounting points low on the engine where this sits in a frame of a excavator or a pavement roller or wherever this was used, and there's nothing on the top except for these little hanger points. So I'm gonna have to go off this bell housing support for most of my mount points and create kind of a truss. But I won't know where that sits until I get the transmission in its spot, and then remove these, the pump and that drain, so I can get the engine back far enough so that it clears where the radiator is gonna go, because the radiator demarks what's far enough back so the front wheel doesn't hit the motor. And I want to get it back as far as possible to get my mass centralization optimized. Well, those are big words. If you're not familiar with Harley transmissions, which I'm learning about, this shaft here is the input shaft and the output shaft for the rear wheel. So these are concentric within the transmission, and the clutch is actually outboard here. This giant thing sits outside. This is all under a primary cover on Harleys, and usually the foot peg is out here in front, so this would be under your thigh or whatever. But for me, I want a neutral seating position like the Tiger has, and that puts my foot right in the way. Okay, so my fourth problem is How do I mount a sprocket to this flywheel on the engine? And when I was looking for sprockets to try to figure out how I was going to make this all work, I happened to come across this. This is fifth gear for this transmission. And I was looking for some sort of splined shaft. And this was cheap, and it gets me what I want. And the light bulb went off in my head once I saw this, is I can, if I screw up my gearing, I can buy different sprockets. These are made to go in this position. But since I'm using a 530 chain for both the primary drive and the secondary drive, I'll be able to find different sprockets for this. And what I've got to do with this guy is basically chop this gear off, and then I'm going to make a plate that bolts into these 5 holes, and bore a hole in the middle, and then press this into it and weld it in place. This will be missing this big 5th gear. And I'm going to shorten this enough so that it's as close to the flywheel as possible, with the chain still clearing anything here. And then that way, if I wear this out or want to change my gearing, I can just use Harley chain drive kits, sprockets. So I hope this all works. We'll see.